The crystal chandeliers above cast dancing shadows as I scrubbed grease from expensive china plates, my designer wedding ring hidden beneath yellow rubber gloves. The elite guests upstairs had no idea they were commanding the billionaire heiress who owned every marble tile beneath their designer heels to clean up their mess. Tonight, their true colors would cost them everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Victoria, and 3 years ago I made a decision that transformed my entire world. I married Marcus Chen, the tech mogul who revolutionized artificial intelligence and built a fortune that most people can't even comprehend. But here's what the tabloids and business magazines never understood about us. We fell in love over shared dreams of making the world better, not because of bank account numbers or stock portfolios. I first met Marcus at a volunteer program for homeless veterans in downtown Seattle. While other wealthy tech entrepreneurs were networking at exclusive country clubs, Marcus was there every Saturday morning, serving breakfast and listening to stories from men and women who had sacrificed everything for our country. He wore old jeans and a faded university sweatshirt, his hands dirty from helping set up tables and chairs. Nothing about him screamed billionaire, and that's exactly what drew me to him. I was there representing the nonprofit where I worked as a counselor, helping veterans transition back into civilian life. It was challenging work that didn't pay much, but it filled my soul in ways that money never could. When Marcus approached me that morning, asking genuine questions about PTSD support programs, I had no idea I was talking to the man whose company had just gone public for $12 billion. To me, he was just someone who cared about making a real difference. Our relationship blossomed over months of working side by side at various charitable organizations. Marcus would show up in his beat-up Honda Civic, roll up his sleeves, and work harder than volunteers half his age. He never mentioned his wealth, never name-dropped his connections, never tried to impress me with expensive gifts or fancy restaurants. Instead, he impressed me with his character, his genuine empathy for others, and his unwavering commitment to using his success to lift up those who had been left behind. When he finally told me about his business empire, I was serving soup at a shelter during a particularly cold winter storm. He mentioned casually that he needed to leave early for a board meeting, and when I asked where he worked, he simply said, "Oh, I run a little tech company called Quantum Dynamics." My ladle nearly slipped from my hands. Quantum Dynamics wasn't just any tech company. It was the company that had revolutionized machine learning and employed over 50,000 people worldwide. But even after I learned about his extraordinary wealth, nothing changed between us. Marcus still drove his old car, still wore simple clothes, still showed up to volunteer work with the same humble attitude. He explained that money was just a tool to him, a means to create positive change in the world. His real passion was using technology to solve humanity's biggest challenges, from climate change to poverty to medical research. When Marcus proposed to me a year later, it wasn't with a flashy public display or an impossibly expensive ring. Instead, he asked me during one of our volunteer shifts, right there in the shelter kitchen where we had shared so many meaningful conversations. The ring was beautiful but modest, and his proposal was simple. "Victoria, you make me want to be better than I ever thought possible. Will you build a better world with me?" Our wedding was a small, intimate ceremony with close friends and family. We could have afforded the most extravagant celebration imaginable, but we chose instead to donate what would have been our wedding budget to the Veterans Program where we met. The local news barely covered our marriage, which was exactly how we wanted it. We valued privacy, authenticity, and the ability to move through the world without constant scrutiny. After our marriage, I continued working as a counselor while Marcus expanded his philanthropic efforts. We bought a beautiful estate in the hills overlooking the city, but we didn't buy it to show off our wealth. We bought it because Marcus had a vision of turning it into a retreat center for veterans dealing with trauma, a place where they could find peace and healing surrounded by nature. The mansion would serve as both our home and a sanctuary for those who needed it most. The property was breathtaking, 30 acres of rolling hills, ancient oak trees, and gardens that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the mountains. The main house was a masterpiece of architecture, with soaring ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a ballroom that could accommodate hundreds of guests. But what I loved most about our home was how Marcus had designed spaces specifically for therapy sessions, meditation, art classes, and support groups. We lived simply despite our surroundings. Most evenings, you'd find us in the kitchen making dinner together, discussing the veterans we had worked with that day, or planning our next charitable initiative. Marcus insisted on doing his own laundry, maintained a small vegetable garden, and preferred reading books in our cozy library to attending high society events. We were wealthy beyond measure, but we were also just two people in love, committed to making a difference. This brings me to the night that changed everything. The night of our annual Winter Gala for Heroes, an event that Marcus had been planning for 8 months. The gala was his brainchild, designed to raise funds for veteran support programs across the Pacific Northwest. He had personally reached out to tech leaders, politicians, celebrities, and philanthropists, convincing them to attend and donate to this crucial cause. The guest list was impressive: senators, Fortune 500 CEOs, Hollywood actors, and social media influencers with millions of followers. Tickets cost $10,000 per person, with all proceeds going directly to organizations that provided housing, mental health services, and job training for veterans. Marcus was incredibly excited about the potential impact, estimating that the evening could raise over $2 million for programs that were desperately underfunded. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. For weeks leading up to the event, our home was transformed into a winter wonderland. Professional decorators worked around the clock, installing ice sculptures, thousands of white roses, and lighting that made our ballroom look like something from a fairy tale. The catering company brought in their finest china, crystal glasses, and silverware that sparkled under the chandeliers. Every detail was perfect, from the string quartet that would provide background music to the photographer who would capture moments of generosity and connection. But as the big night approached, I found myself growing curious about something that had been bothering me for months. Marcus and I moved in very different social circles. While he interacted regularly with wealthy donors and business leaders, I spent my days with veterans who were struggling to pay rent, find employment, or access basic health care. I had started to wonder about the disconnect between the privileged world that would be gathering in our home and the reality of the people we were trying to help. This curiosity led to a conversation I had with Maria, a veteran I had been counseling for 6 months. Maria had served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic, saving countless lives under enemy fire. When she returned home, she struggled with PTSD and found it nearly impossible to find work despite her extraordinary skills and dedication. She was living in a tiny studio apartment, working 2 part-time jobs just to cover basic expenses, and fighting every day to maintain her mental health. During one of our sessions, Maria made a comment that stuck with me for weeks afterward. She said, "Victoria, I appreciate everything you and your husband are doing for veterans, but sometimes I wonder if the people who write those big checks really understand what our lives are like. Do they see us as real people with stories and dreams, or are we just a tax write-off and a photo opportunity?" Her words haunted me because I realized I didn't know the answer. The wealthy individuals who attended our charity events were generous with their donations, but did they truly respect and value the veterans they were helping? Or did they see charitable giving as simply another social obligation, a way to network and enhance their public image? This question consumed my thoughts as the gala approached. I found myself wondering what would happen if these privileged guests encountered a veteran in a service position, not as the honored subject of their charity, but as someone serving them champagne or cleaning up their mess. Would they treat that person with dignity and respect, or would they reveal attitudes that contradicted their charitable donations? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had an unprecedented opportunity to find out. As the lady of the house, I would normally spend the evening in an elegant gown, mingling with guests, giving speeches about our mission, and gracefully accepting compliments on the beautiful event. But what if I chose a different role for the evening? What if I experienced the gala from an entirely different perspective? The idea was risky, even dangerous to my reputation and Marcus's business relationships. But it was also irresistible. How often does someone get the chance to see their social circle's true character? How often can you step outside your privilege and experience the world as millions of working people do every single day? I made my decision 3 days before the gala, and I told no one. Not Marcus, not our household staff, not even my closest friends. This would be my secret social experiment, my chance to learn something important about human nature and the society we lived in. I would attend the Winter Gala for Heroes, but not as Victoria Chen, philanthropist and tech mogul's wife. I would attend as a member of the catering staff. The transformation required careful planning. I borrowed a black uniform from our housekeeper, Elena, telling her I wanted to understand the event from a staff perspective to improve future planning. Elena looked at me strangely, but didn't ask questions. She had worked for wealthy families long enough to know that rich people sometimes had unusual requests. I spent hours practicing a different posture, a more deferential tone of voice, and the kind of invisible presence that good service staff maintained. I studied how Elena and other household employees moved through our home, how they interacted with guests during smaller dinner parties, and how they managed to be helpful without being intrusive. It was an art form I had never appreciated before. On the morning of the gala, Marcus left early for a series of business meetings that would keep him busy until just before the event started. He kissed me goodbye and reminded me to start getting ready early, since the first guests would arrive at 6 o'clock. I smiled and promised I would be ready, which was technically true, just not in the way he expected. As soon as Marcus's car disappeared down our winding driveway, I began my transformation. I pulled my long dark hair back into a tight bun, applied minimal makeup to make my features less distinctive, and put on Elena's uniform along with comfortable black shoes. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The confident, well-dressed woman who usually stared back at me had been replaced by someone who looked like she worked hard for every dollar she earned. The catering team arrived at noon to begin their preparations, and I slipped into the kitchen through our service entrance as if I had been hired for the day. The head caterer, a stressed-looking woman named Patricia, was so busy coordinating her team that she barely glanced at me when I introduced myself as Victoria, a temporary worker sent by the staffing agency. She handed me an apron and immediately put me to work, arranging appetizers on silver trays. Working in the kitchen was eye-opening in ways I hadn't expected. The pace was relentless, the pressure was intense, and the physical demands were exhausting. My feet ached within the first hour. My back protested from constantly bending over prep tables, and my hands became raw from washing endless streams of dishes and glassware. This was honest, important work, but it was also incredibly demanding. As I worked alongside the other staff members, I heard their conversations and learned about their lives. Carmen, who was arranging flowers, worked 3 different catering jobs to support her elderly mother and 2 young children. David, who was polishing silverware, was putting himself through nursing school and took catering gigs to pay for textbooks and lab fees. Jessica, who was setting up the bar, was a single mother who had been laid off from her corporate job and was taking any work she could find while searching for permanent employment. These were talented, hard-working people with complex lives, dreams, and challenges. They weren't just anonymous service providers, they were human beings with stories that mattered, families who depended on them, and aspirations for better futures. Yet I knew that the guests arriving tonight would likely see them as invisible, interchangeable parts of the event machinery. As 6 o'clock approached, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that I had never experienced before. I was about to see my world from a completely different angle, and I had no idea what I would discover. Would the generous donors who supported our veteran programs treat working people with respect and kindness? Or would I witness behavior that contradicted everything they claimed to believe about human dignity and worth? Patricia called us together for a final briefing, reminding us to be polite, efficient, and invisible. "These guests are very important people," she stressed. "They're not just wealthy, they're influential. One complaint from tonight could affect our company's reputation for years. So smile, work hard, and remember that your job is to make their evening perfect." As the first guests began arriving, I picked up a tray of champagne glasses and took a deep breath. The experiment was about to begin, and there would be no turning back. I was about to discover whether the people who wrote checks to help veterans would show the same compassion to a woman they believed was working multiple jobs just to pay her bills. The evening that would change everything was finally here. The first guests swept through our front doors like royalty entering their palace, designer gowns trailing across marble floors that I had helped polish just hours earlier. Senator Rebecca Walsh arrived in a stunning emerald dress worth more than most people's annual salaries, immediately commanding attention from the photographers and social media influencers documenting every moment of the evening. Behind her came tech mogul Jonathan Sterling, whose company had recently been valued at $8 billion, followed by Hollywood actress Miranda Cross, whose latest film had broken box office records worldwide. I moved through the crowd with my tray of champagne, observing how these powerful individuals interacted with the world around them. The transformation was immediate and striking. The moment they entered our ballroom, decorated with thousands of white roses and glittering ice sculptures, their entire demeanor shifted into what I could only describe as performance mode. They air-kissed acquaintances, posed for photos, and spoke in voices just loud enough for others to overhear their impressive name-dropping and business accomplishments. But it was their interaction with the serving staff that truly caught my attention. As I offered champagne to small groups of guests, I noticed how they would reach for glasses without making eye contact, continuing their conversations as if I were a piece of furniture rather than a human being. Some would snap their fingers to get attention when they needed something, while others would talk about the staff as if we couldn't hear or understand their comments. The first real test came when I approached a group discussing Marcus's latest technological breakthrough. Senator Walsh was holding court, explaining to her audience how artificial intelligence would revolutionize government efficiency. As I offered fresh champagne, she took a glass without acknowledgement and continued speaking. "The key is finding the right partners," she said, gesturing dramatically. "People who understand that innovation requires sacrifice and dedication, not just throwing money at problems." I found her words ironic, considering she had no idea that the woman serving her champagne had helped design several of the veteran support programs they were fundraising for tonight. But I remained silent, invisible, playing my role perfectly while absorbing every detail of their behavior. The evening's first major incident occurred near the auction display, where valuable items donated by local businesses were showcased for the fundraising portion of the night. Margaret Westfield, a socialite known for her extravagant lifestyle and cutting comments, was examining a weekend getaway package to Napa Valley when she accidentally knocked over her wine glass. The red liquid splashed across the white tablecloth and onto her designer shoes. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" she exclaimed loudly, drawing attention from nearby guests. "Someone clean this up immediately! This is completely unacceptable at an event of this caliber." I hurried over with napkins and cleaning supplies, kneeling to address the spill while Margaret continued her tirade. "I can't believe the incompetence of the staff tonight," she announced to anyone within earshot. "First the champagne was too warm, now this mess. Don't these people have any training?" As I worked to clean her shoes, Margaret looked down at me with undisguised disdain. "Be careful with those," she commanded. "They cost more than you probably make in 6 months. I shouldn't have to worry about whether you know how to handle expensive items." I bit my tongue and continued cleaning, reminding myself that this was exactly the kind of behavior I wanted to observe. Margaret's shoes, while beautiful, probably cost around $3,000, a significant amount, but hardly 6 months of anyone's salary unless they were earning minimum wage. Her assumption revealed everything about how she viewed working people and their worth. But Margaret wasn't finished demonstrating her character. As I stood up with the soiled napkins, she grabbed my arm roughly. "Before you go," she said, "I want you to bring me another glass of the good wine, not whatever cheap stuff they're serving to everyone else. And make sure it's properly chilled this time. I don't know why they hire people who don't understand basic service standards." I nodded politely and headed toward the bar, where David was expertly mixing cocktails for a growing crowd of guests. As I waited for Margaret's wine, I overheard a conversation between 2 venture capitalists who were discussing their latest investments. They were debating whether to fund a startup that provided job training for veterans, and their comments revealed troubling attitudes about the people they claimed to want to help. "The problem with these veteran programs," said the first man, adjusting his platinum cufflinks, "is that you're dealing with damaged goods. PTSD, substance abuse, anger issues. It's a lot of baggage for employers to take on. The return on investment is questionable at best." His companion nodded sagely. "Exactly why I prefer funding technology solutions. Much more predictable outcomes than trying to fix broken people. These charity events are great for networking and tax write-offs, but let's be realistic about the actual impact." I felt my hands clench involuntarily as I listened to them reduce Maria and countless other veterans to damaged goods and broken people. These were individuals who had risked their lives to protect the freedom and security that allowed these men to build their fortunes. Yet here they were, at an event specifically designed to support veterans, revealing their true feelings about the people they were supposedly helping. The evening's tone grew increasingly uncomfortable as I witnessed more examples of dismissive behavior. Technology executive Sarah Chen loudly complained about the temperature in the ballroom, demanding that someone fix the air conditioning immediately because some of us are wearing real fur and can't afford to have it damaged by excessive heat. When I quietly informed her that the climate control was already optimized for guest comfort, she rolled her eyes and muttered something about uneducated staff not understanding luxury items. Real estate mogul Harrison Black treated the situation like a comedy show, making jokes about the help to his dinner companions. "I bet half these servers are probably illegal immigrants," he said with a laugh. "That's why the service is so slow tonight. They're probably afraid of getting deported if they move too fast and draw attention to themselves." His table erupted in laughter at this comment, completely unaware that Carmen, who was serving their table, was a naturalized citizen who spoke 3 languages fluently and had a bachelor's degree in international business. The casual racism and classism of their humor was stomach-turning, especially considering these were the same people who would later bid thousands of dollars on auction items to support veterans from diverse backgrounds. But the real nightmare began when Isabella Hartwell arrived fashionably late, making a grand entrance that demanded everyone's attention. Isabella was known throughout high society as a woman who collected charities like designer handbags, not because she cared deeply about the causes, but because charitable involvement enhanced her social status and provided networking opportunities with other wealthy individuals. Isabella swept into the ballroom wearing a custom gown that probably cost more than most people's cars, her jewelry sparkling under the chandeliers like a constellation of diamonds and sapphires. She immediately began holding court near the auction display, surrounded by admirers who competed for her attention and approval. Isabella had a reputation for being demanding and difficult, but she also had the kind of wealth and influence that made people eager to stay in her good graces. Within minutes of her arrival, Isabella had identified me as an easy target for her particular brand of cruelty. She summoned me with an imperious wave of her hand, not bothering to make eye contact as she delivered her first round of complaints. "You," she said, pointing a perfectly manicured finger in my direction. "I need a proper martini, not whatever amateur hour cocktails they're serving at the bar. Extra dry, 3 olives, and make sure the gin is Hendrick's, not some bottom-shelf garbage they're probably using to cut costs." I politely explained that I was part of the serving staff, not the bartending team, but Isabella's expression darkened immediately. "I don't care what your specific job description says," she snapped. "I'm telling you what I need, and I expect you to make it happen. That's how customer service works in the real world. Something you clearly need to learn." Rather than escalate the situation, I agreed to get her martini from David at the bar. But when I returned with her drink, prepared exactly to her specifications, Isabella took 1 sip and immediately began another tirade. "This is completely wrong," she announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "The gin is wrong, the ratio is wrong, and these olives are clearly from a jar instead of being fresh. How am I supposed to enjoy this event when the staff can't even handle basic requests?" I offered to have David remake the drink, but Isabella was just getting started. She had found an audience for her performance, and she was determined to make the most of it. "This is exactly what's wrong with hiring unqualified people," she continued, addressing her comments to the growing crowd of onlookers. "They have no attention to detail, no understanding of quality, and no pride in their work. It's really quite sad when you think about it." The humiliation continued as Isabella found new ways to assert her dominance and superiority. She criticized my posture, my voice, my appearance, and my competence, turning each interaction into a public demonstration of her power and my supposed inadequacy. Other guests began to follow her lead, treating me with increasing disrespect as the evening progressed. The breaking point came when Isabella decided she needed entertainment beyond simply bullying the staff. She had been drinking steadily throughout the evening, and alcohol had loosened her already limited inhibitions about appropriate behavior. During the dinner service, she began what could only be described as a systematic campaign to destroy my dignity in front of the entire gathering. "You know what I think?" Isabella announced during a brief lull in conversation, her voice carrying across several nearby tables. "I think it's fascinating to observe people in their natural habitat. Take our server here, for example." She gestured toward me as I was clearing plates from her table. "Look at her carefully, everyone. This is what happens when people don't apply themselves in school, when they don't develop valuable skills or make smart choices about their futures." The dining room fell uncomfortably quiet as Isabella continued her impromptu sociology lecture. She's probably, what, 30 years old? Maybe younger, but hard work ages you quickly when you're in this kind of position. I'd guess she's got a high school education, at best. Probably some community college courses that didn't lead anywhere productive. Maybe a few failed relationships, possibly children she's struggling to support on minimum wage. I stood frozen beside her table, dirty plates balanced in my hands, as Isabella painted a fictional portrait of my life for the entertainment of her audience. Her words were cruel enough, but what made the situation truly unbearable was the response from other guests. Some looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Others nodded along with Isabella's analysis, apparently finding her psychological profiling amusing or insightful. The really tragic part, Isabella continued, clearly enjoying her captive audience, is that people like this never learn from their mistakes. They bounce from job to job, always blaming circumstances or other people for their failures, never taking responsibility for their own poor decisions. They'll spend their entire lives cleaning up other people's messes because they never developed the intelligence or ambition to create anything valuable themselves. The room was completely silent now, with every guest listening to Isabella's monologue about my supposed failures and limitations. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, studying me as if I were a specimen in a laboratory rather than a human being with feelings, thoughts, and dignity. The weight of their collective judgment was suffocating, especially knowing that every word Isabella spoke was based on assumptions about my appearance and job title, rather than any actual knowledge about who I was or what I had accomplished. But Isabella wasn't finished destroying me yet. She had worked herself into a state of righteous indignation about the laziness and incompetence of working-class people, and she was determined to drive her point home with maximum impact. "I'm sure she has all sorts of excuses," Isabella said, taking another sip of her correctly prepared martini. "Single mothers always do, but at some point you have to stop making excuses and start taking responsibility for your life choices. The rest of us shouldn't have to subsidize your poor decisions through higher prices and substandard service." The cruelty of her words was breathtaking, but what hurt even more was the silence from everyone else in the room. These were people who had paid $10,000 each to support veterans struggling with homelessness, unemployment, and mental health challenges. Yet when confronted with what they believed was a working-class woman being publicly humiliated, they remained silent, complicit in her cruelty through their inaction. As Isabella prepared to launch into another round of character assassination, I heard a familiar voice calling from the ballroom entrance. "Excuse me, has anyone seen my wife? I'm looking for Victoria Chen." Marcus had arrived from his business meetings, and his voice carried clearly across the now silent dining room. Isabella paused mid-sentence, confusion flickering across her face. Several guests turned toward the entrance, recognizing Marcus's voice, but not understanding why he was asking about someone named Victoria Chen at their charity gala. The name meant nothing to them, despite the fact that they were guests in her home, enjoying her hospitality and supporting her charitable initiatives. "Your wife?" Isabella called out, her voice slightly slurred from alcohol. "Sir, I'm not sure who you're referring to. There's no one here by that name except—" She trailed off as understanding began to dawn on a few faces in the crowd. Marcus appeared in the dining room doorway, his eyes immediately scanning the room until they found me standing beside Isabella's table with dirty plates still balanced in my hands. For a moment, confusion and concern battled for control of his expression as he tried to process what he was seeing. His wife, dressed as a server, being publicly humiliated by one of their guests. "Victoria?" he said, his voice filled with bewilderment. "What are you doing? Why are you dressed like that?" The transformation in the room was instantaneous and dramatic. Every conversation stopped, every fork was lowered, every eye turned to stare at me as the impossible reality began to sink in. The woman they had been treating as invisible, dismissing as unimportant, mocking as unsuccessful, was Victoria Chen, co-host of their elegant charity gala and wife of one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the technology industry. Isabella's face went through a series of remarkable changes as understanding crashed over her like a tsunami. The confident smirk disappeared, replaced by confusion, then horror, then a desperate attempt to process how badly she had miscalculated the situation. The woman she had been systematically destroying for the past hour wasn't a struggling single mother working multiple minimum wage jobs. She was one of the most influential philanthropists in the city. Marcus crossed the room quickly, his business instincts allowing him to read the tension and humiliation in my posture even if he didn't fully understand what had transpired. He gently took the plates from my hands and set them on the nearest table, then looked directly at Isabella and the other guests who had been participating in or silently enabling my public humiliation. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had built a billion-dollar empire. "But I'm afraid I missed something important. Could someone please explain to me why my wife has been serving dinner instead of enjoying the charity gala we're hosting in our home?" The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella opened and closed her mouth several times, desperately searching for words that might somehow repair the catastrophic damage she had inflicted on her reputation and social standing. Other guests who had laughed at her cruel commentary now stared at their plates, unwilling to make eye contact with either Marcus or me. Senator Walsh was the first to attempt damage control, rising from her seat with the practiced grace of a career politician. "Marcus, I'm sure this is just some sort of misunderstanding," she said, her voice carefully modulated to convey concern without admitting any wrongdoing. "Perhaps Victoria was helping out with some last-minute staffing issues. You know how these events can be. There are always unexpected challenges." But Marcus was no longer interested in polite explanations or face-saving gestures. His eyes had found mine, and in that look I saw recognition of what I had endured, fury at how I had been treated, and admiration for the courage it had taken to expose the true character of their social circle. He understood immediately that this had been an intentional experiment, and he could see from my expression that the results had been far worse than either of us could have imagined. "Actually," I said, finding my voice for the first time since Marcus had arrived, "there's no misunderstanding at all. I chose to spend this evening working as part of the catering staff because I wanted to see how the people supporting our veteran programs would treat someone they perceived as different from themselves." The impact of my words rippled through the room like an earthquake, fundamentally shifting the ground beneath everyone's feet. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity or a staffing emergency. This was a deliberate revelation of their character, and they had failed the test spectacularly. The generous donors who had gathered to support struggling veterans had demonstrated that their compassion extended only to people they considered worthy of respect. Isabella finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "I had no idea who you were," she said, as if this somehow excused the cruelty of her behavior. "If I had known, I would never have." "Exactly," I interrupted, my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil of the evening. "You treated me that way because you thought I was just a server, just someone working hard to pay her bills and support her family. But here's what you don't understand, Isabella. That woman you were describing, that person you were mocking and humiliating, she deserves exactly the same respect you would show me now." The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely, and everyone present understood that they were witnessing a moment that would define their futures in this social circle. Marcus stepped closer to me, his hand finding mine in a gesture of solidarity that sent a clear message about where his loyalties lay. This wasn't just about defending his wife. This was about defending principles of human dignity that formed the foundation of everything they claimed to believe. The reckoning had begun, and there would be no going back to the comfortable illusions that had allowed these people to see themselves as generous and compassionate while treating working people as less than human. Tonight their true colors had been revealed, and the consequences would extend far beyond this single evening of charity and supposed goodwill. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.